everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you in this new interview of 30 Minutes With, a series of conversation with African scholars, policymakers, artists on current African issues. So we are back from Ghana, but continuing our series with cultural activists and scholars. So today we are going to discuss creative industries, urban cultures, and the music economy in Africa. And to discuss that, we have someone who is very specialized in the question. Her name is Fatou Mbaye. She is a lecturer in culture and creative industries at City University, London. She used to be a postdoctoral research fellow at the African Centre for Cities of the University of Cape Town, UCT. Her research interests include urban popular culture, the music economy in relation to entrepreneurship, cultural development and cultural labor, practice and policy of cultural production in Africa. Especially, her main area of focus is West Africa. So Jenny has a PhD in human geography, specialized in urban cultural economy from the London School of Economics, LSE, a graduate diploma in management of cultural organization from HEC, Montreal, an MSc in international studies specialized in ethnomusicology from University of Montreal, and a BA in sociology from Concordia University. And she has worked extensively in cultural and media organizations in Senegal and Burkina Faso, and has done research in Canada and the UK, and worked for foundations such as Letera 27 and Fitzcarraldo, and she is regularly consulted by the UNESCO, for policy research, and she was a recipient of the 2013 RAPAL postdoctoral fellowship. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jenny Fatou Mbaye. And thank you for having us today in your office.
Thank you very much, Rama, for having me in your series.
Thank you for accepting the invite. So, as mentioned, we are going to discuss creative industries, urban cultures, and the music economy in Africa. Mm-hmm. So to start with, there is a Senegalese thinker, I think it's Souleymane Bachir Diagne, who once said, you cannot be economically right if you're socio-culturally wrong. So what do you think is the link between culture and economy, especially in the African context?
So first of all, I'd like to thank you for drawing to my attention this quote, because I wasn't aware of it. And Bachir Diagne is writer and thinker that I appreciate very much, and that kind of sum up a key relationship between culture and economy. One way to look at those two fields is to understand how they're linked and related, is to remind how in any economic context, in any expression of the economy, you always see or stem from a concept, an idea, and its application. It's always something that is imbued and filled in by meaning. The fact that different societies have also different economy. The fact that we are nowadays experiencing neoliberalism, it's an ideology. And it's a sense that we have decided to give to the word that is expressed through capitalism. So it's always important to remember that at the end of the day, when you have an economy, it stems from a certain cultural understanding of what this economy should be about. So that's one way of understanding, as I was mentioning before, how in some societies you don't have such a pregnant concept of savings. You don't have such importance that is given to savings, but you may have different economic dynamics that are very much reflective of the cultural context from which it stems and that it expresses. For instance, the use of remittances, the fact that in some societies this is not so much present. So all this tells you something about a given cultural context, a given society. So culture and economy are not only linked, but interacting, and it's a kind of iterative process that is happening there. At another level, so that's very much in relation to the quotes that you mentioned at the beginning, the fact that you need to remember that you are expressing some form of identity in the way you are building and developing an economy. And this means that culture is an important part of the economy, and economy is an important expression of a given culture. At another scale, and especially in the field that I'm interested in, culture and economy have two intermingling dynamics that it's worthwhile noting. One has to do with the kind of economization of culture, the fact that now more and more cultural artifacts, products, services, and goods occupy a key position in a national, local, and even worldwide economy. So it's give more preeminence than before, if you want, to this kind of products. That's one thing. The other thing has to do with more the culturalization of the economy. The fact that nowadays what will distinguish valuable products, something that has value, good, a service that has value, may not just be in terms of tangible qualities. The fact that it becomes more and more based on the meaning and the sense-making practices that surround the actual product. So an example that is quite straightforward is before you may choose a coffee machine just because it makes good coffee, or you may want to select, I don't know, a fridge just because, you know, it keeps cold the stuff that you want to keep cold, because we progressed and we're no longer keeping into the salt. But actually you have so many choices in terms of the fridge offer that you may choose not only a fridge based on its function, but also based on its aesthetics. And instead, because you have, you know, everything is red in your kitchen, that's the case, something's red, ever is, you know, the color or the shapes, or that speaks to you, that speaks about you, you will be more inclined to choose a fridge that, you know, fits with a red context. This is not really functional, but it has something else that is linked to this, what I was referring to as the culturalization of the economy. So these two dimensions. What it means for our societies. It means although yes, we are in a global world where we're all connected, where, you know, most of our economies and their respective dynamics are based on the financial rhythm of the city, or New York and Wall Street, etc. We still have the possibility to invent ourselves. We still have distinctive characteristics in our economy. So, for instance, I remember in 2008 when people were kind of saying, yeah, this is the worst financial crisis. In African context, it was not so much a financial crisis, it was an alimentary crisis. Like suddenly people who were having 2 or 3 meals a day were, you know, restrained to 1 meal a day. So the way it's, the kind of implication, repercussions are different. Not only in scales, but also the way they work. We have more a cash economy. What we do with our mobile phone and mobile money is completely different than the ones being done in Western world. The fact that, you know, Auntie, I don't have any more credit, and, you know, you can exchange. This is something that doesn't exist here. So all this is always important to remember, the kind of interrelationship, intermingling dynamic that exists between a material word and a more symbolic word. And I think that's something that's a take-home message that is very much eloquently expressed in this quote. One last thing on culture and economy, especially in our context, is that I remember in my PhD thesis, because of this interview, I was just like trying to reflect back on the kind of reflective journey that led me to where I am now. I remember mentioning that the cultural economy, and I'm not talking about the creative economy, but the cultural economy is, because of this dual dimension that I just mentioned about, that does not only focus on the culture and creative industries, but there's something else between these relationships. So the cultural economy can be really a boat not to miss for our continent. So there may be some stages that we were not able to compete on equal ground with the rest of the world, but in this playground, we have our our part to play. We have the capacity and the capabilities to play such part, and this is a competition on which we can enter on more equal ground.
And I think what you just said is really important, that the cultural economy is something that is not to be missed. So what do you think, at the light of the various and maybe the more promising experiences that you can grasp from the continent, what do you think is the role of the cultural and creative economies and industries in driving socio-economic and political change in Africa? And if you can refer to some examples.
So the role of cultural economy, and here I would like to make a little diversion to cultural policy, which for me can link in terms of this progressive potential of culture for larger development. Let's call it that way, development or transformation of our societies. And it's about, so for me, cultural policy as a field of practice is an opportunity to redesign, reinvent the relations between the governees and the governed. Those who govern and those who are governed, between governments and civil society. What are those relationships? There's this hip-hop artist from Burkina Faso who keeps on saying, you hired the president, so if he doesn't do a good job, you can, kick him out. But so although in a quite expressive way, he's very much right. There's a kind of, I don't want to sound like very much old French political scientist, but there's a social contract here. We have a contract, we have a deal. And this deal is not only about the materiality of it, but the symbolic of it. What kind of people do we want to be? What kind of society do we want to be? What kind of future can we envisage for ourselves? So what kind of economy we want to build? What kind of development we want to build? And this is very much for me a chance that is offered by this kind of dual dimension that is expressed within the cultural economy, allowing for new invention, new imaginations, and their practical, empirical, pragmatic expression and inscriptions. Now, the tricky part, to give examples. So I think the first thing is that it gives a chance for people, wherever they are, to have their say, to again this work of reinvention. So, giving an example, cultural economy. If I think of part of the cultural economy, for instance, they take the example of Africulturban. So, Africulturban in the popular banlieue of Dakar, Pekin, that was really created out of the initiative, the will of one of the hip hop artists, Matador, but not only, who really had not only a vision. Let's see, we have a cultural center quite depleted, we have policymakers that are not really taking serious action to embrace disillusioned youth, idle youth, and this youth bulge is a timing bomb. We've seen it, we know it, we've been saying it again and again, and so it's about, you know, taking, like, developing a certain vision of culture, of what it can be and what it can offer by creating festival, creating, you know, the DJ school, media school, language school. They have plenty, but also giving actions, just like Fumalade is doing in jail, among prisoners. So what culture can do actually for the people, and we can see how it has also a potential to link up with a political potential, or to link up with a political impact, when in 2013 you have at the ministry level urban affairs advisor that's being, as a position that is being created, that you have now, if we look at in 2014 or 2015, Wakam, who are emulating what was being done in Pekin with Africulturban, with the La Maison des Cultures Urbaines, so the cultural affairs house, if we can translate it, if we need to translate it. So again, it's about, and you can see how here you have a different relationship that is being designed de facto between governed and governors, exactly, but also what culture can be about, what cultural policy can embrace, and hence what the cultural economy can also bring to a given society, but always from a grounded perspective, always embedded, deeply embedded from a context. So not a generic, what can you do? How can you do it? There's no such magical formula, but it's a work to be engaged with, to be willing to take, and to be committed to. Don't know if that answer.
And I think what you just said embraces the work a lot of cultural activists who define themselves as artivists are doing to engage with the policymakers and to make sure that their voice is being heard. So in your work you have in particular focused on urban music and the role of the music economy, especially in West Africa with Ora, for example. Why this interest, and which artists inspire you the most, and why?
Wow, so why this interest? So I partly grew up in Paris suburb and banlieue pour le coup, and in Ivory Coast, and so I always went to Dakar for holidays, but not for extended period. And I remember when I was doing, when I was studying in Canada, I used to come back to do internships, research internships, and one time I was working in the radio, and there was also a time where I realized that there was a very active hip-hop scene. And I was fascinated by the fact that it was not only hip-hop scene because I mentioned about the French banlieue, because hip-hop has kind of been the soundtrack of my childhood.
But were you practicing?
No, but as Paris once said, you don't do hip hop, you are hip hop. I'm very much about that. Okay. So I keep on freestyling, putting my bombs in the different academic policy cycles, shaking people in their comfort from their comfort zone. That's the way I'm participating in the movement. But I can't. I can't rhyme. I can't freestyle. I do a lot of freestyle. I ask my students. They often wonder where she's going. To cut it short, so I was fascinated by the fact not only that there was a hip hop scene, but the way it was structuring itself on the margin. So for a very, very long time, especially in Senegalese context, you had kind of a monopoly in terms of the organization structures of production, distribution, diffusion, dissemination, of the musical product. And they're all at a different scale. So maybe we weren't talking about cultural industries, but a form of a cultural economy, because there you can have multiplicity of scale. They were actually creating duplication plant, recording studio, and they were making things happen. And what I was even more interested in is that I realized that it was producing beforehand for a local consumption. It was speaking from and to the local. That was one thing that I was very much interested in. It was about investing in here and now, from here and now. And what was especially stimulating, especially fascinating for me, is that this here and now was resonating in different places in West Africa. So, for once, you have to remember that at that time, just like you had a monopoly in terms of music production structures, we won't give any name, you also had a kind of monopoly in terms of touring system for West African artists. So basically that you had this absurd reality where, as a West African artist, the only way for you to tour was through French cultural centers. And that was it. And you also had very divided musical markets. Here, I'm talking more from the music side. So more divided musical markets. For instance, you have musique mandingue. So you would have ndombolo. You would have different scenes, but not necessarily speaking to or consuming each other's music. So one example I like to give is, for instance, if you were about to ask any Senegalese lambda citizen to name one artist from Gambia, it's neighbor, we even eat that country, but you won't be able to do so. You may be able to name an artist from Mali, because this artist would be known in Paris, would be known in Berlin, would be known in London. So here I had a movement who wasn't concerned about London, Paris, and Berlin, for instance, but more about here and now. And this here and now were resonating in different locales. So because hip hop again was very much about so for me, that's why I refer to it as a transculture. It's something that exists by itself, but always needs to be translated in its context. But then it becomes a language. You can feel, even though I don't know, it's Indonesian hip hop artists. You can feel it, and you can recognize it. And you had, for once, this kind of hip hop festivals that was burgeoning throughout the region, and that were informally organizing themselves to exchange acts, to exchange artists. So you had another informal network happening here.
And can you just remind us what Aura means?
Aura, it means Artistes Unis pour le Rap Africain, so United Artists for African Rap. And I was blessed. For me it was a real blessing, because at the time I was working on my PhD and I joined this Bureau of Cultural Engineering and Mediation, Accent Multiple. with one of my mentors, who's still my mentor, was my mentor, Abdulaziz Dian, big man that's un grand, un très grand for the Senegal. He's done a lot for the music scene and cultural scene in general. And there was this musical comedy show that they set up, putting together 17 artists, emergent and confirmed, coming from throughout the region, English speaking, French speaking, so that was quite unique. So actually coming from 11 different countries, and who were doing a show to talk about the state of, let's say, the state of childhood. What is it to be a child? What are the different conditions for a child on the continent? So it was a kind of activist type of production. It was supported by Plan International, so an NGO. But it was, at that time, I remember there was a Lion King here in London with fake fabric, fake jewelry, fake everything, fake lyrics. You know, you didn't speak in English, and I was working on this show, and we were touring in Niamey, toured a lot, also in Europe. But it's heavy. I can imagine if you talk about the struggle nowadays to tour artists. When they're a group of 2, 3, 4, 5, you can imagine when you have 17 people coming from 11 different countries, how it can be quite a challenge. I may have digressed.
No, I think it is pretty much the question. And who among these artists inspired you the most?
Oh, who among, yes. So, inspire me, for which I have a lot of respect. Obviously, Matador, I mentioned him before. For me, it's really reminding what he's been doing, what he's been saying, whether it's musically, by exploring spoken word and being open to other stuff, but also making networking, something that Amadou Falbat, so the director of the festival, really took upon as a legacy of Africulturban as an institution now. So Matador, definitely. Didier Wadi, because pioneer, because I was also very much, as I said, I was fascinated by the way actors were structuring the whole scene, creating a market, entertaining a market. Even it's a different scale. Okay, we're not talking about industry, but so there is this notion of entrepreneurship. How do you make things meet the ends at the end of the day? How, and so this kind of juggling between investing at first in a PS system, for then developing a recording studio to do advertising. This is the money maker but at the same time you still have it's what ensures you the musical productions that you're so fond of. So for me it was important, like he's a great example of what it means to be a cultural worker, to me a cultural entrepreneur, to me a creative, this affective labor. There's these two dimensions, there's the affect and there's the labor, and how you juggle between those two, and that was a perfect illustration. But of course, Keyti, Xuman, because they're just brilliant in their respective creativity and dedication and engagement and commitment, whether it's through their previous experience with B-Voice and Rapadio, or the most recent was with the GTA. People who keeps on reinventing yourselves, and just because it's not things are happening at different scales. It doesn't mean that they don't cease to matter, and they keep on making these things mattering. Like it's a generation that keeps on making things happen for their society. But then, of course, there's a new generation, and someone like Purposeux, the writer, for instance, someone that touches me, moves me a lot. Like so much poetry, like this attention to details. The videos, he realized beautiful videos, and yeah, he's a true poet. Like he's a great lyricist. A lot of people.
And we are going to talk about Keyti and Xuman, you just mentioned. You co-authored a paper with Aisha Dem that you titled very poetically Formidable comme Karim Wade, in which you explored the role of hip-hop artists as sentinels for the social and political interests of the people. So, how do you think, why do you think these two, for example, were able, through the JTR, Journal Télévisé Rappé, were successful in using humor and parody to convey their message? What analysis can you make? Is there a changing use of the means? Are people reinventing the way they express themselves to reach the means? Like, hip-hop has always been disruptive, but what do you think is the innovation that JTR has brought? So
that's true that at least certain type of hip hop have always been disruptive. It's for me because it's such a wide field. And because it's a form really, the rap, especially that where you can put every and each one's identity on it and in it, inscribe yourself on it. There's different aspirations that can be vehiculated through that form and through that means. But I think one of the key strength of the JTR and of Keyti and Xuman and of the product itself is, again, when you reinvent yourself, you also know what kind of means of communication are more probable and more appropriate, and for what kind of purpose, if you want to reach a maximum, if you want to reach beyond borders. Because at the end of the day, when I was talking about the here and now that was able to connect, I'm talking about borders that are being reshaped, and reinvented as well. And so hence always the importance of looking at the material with the symbolic and how each and one and how they can influence each other. So coming back to the JTR, it's not only the place of accessing and making it accessible, but so not only in terms of the container, so where the digital is becoming so much important, so much more important, where it becomes also a way of reaching people that you wouldn't have reached otherwise, but also in terms of content and the fact that you realize that always, just like I was mentioning before with the case of Matador and Africulturban, you have a vision, you see a disconnect, you have idle use, and you have depleted building. Here you realize that you have political debates that are happening a lot and very often, and people who are more and more disengaged from this political debate. And what is not the reason, but how can you address this disengagement? And clearly popular ways of talking, strict language, like don't talk with paper, scholarly. Sometimes it's to first the language, and second the parody. Like we are also in a so. Obviously, parody or humor has always been a way of talking about things in a lighter manner than it could have been otherwise. But I think it's especially relevant in our societies where we have those kinship jokes, les blagues apparentées. This is very pregnant and important in our societies, and this is not always the case. But so this is part also of our way of being, of our way of communicating, of our ways of doing, and it means that you can say things that may not have been heard otherwise, that may not have been discussed otherwise, and it's about it allows recreating engagement, and for that I really bow in front of them, because it's always seeing where you can contribute, and just I was giving the example of Matador, or even Didier, but Awadi, and or the case of Xuman and Keyti. It's about also remembering that as a citizen you have rights. Yeah, you have economic rights, you have political rights, you have social rights, but you also have duties, and these are people who are taking their duties seriously, and not only seriously, but they're kind of writing them down to earth. I have the duty. So here you have an alternative information public services, an alternative broadcasting agency that is doing some form of public good, because this public they are part of.
And now let's move to the urban cultures. We are already discussing urban cultures, but your work also pretty much focuses on creative cities. So can you tell us what a creative city looks like? And it's maybe a very naive question.
So what a creative city look like? I think, and that's where I will come back. That was good actually to start with the culture economy, because then I can come back regularly to that. When I was so one of the things that what a creative city looked like, it looked like nothing but itself. So again, when I was talking about there is no formula, there's no magical recipe, there is no at the end of the day, a creative city is a city that embraces not only its diversity, its multiplicity, that is true to some form of its openness, but that is before anything yet true to itself. How far are we managing to embrace what we are, really? And what I find very interesting, it's a way of looking into this cultural economy that I'm so interested in, a way that is quite specific and interesting for me in the sense that the urban scale of a city is kind of a microcosm of a nation. It's because there are more the issue of proximity, you know, this link between governee and governed, governed and governor, or the ones who governs and the ones who are governed, is much more revealing. It's much more obvious, if you want, and it's also much more immediate. So there's things that can be done more in a much quicker way, in a much more let's say visible way than otherwise. But a creative city is a city that looks like itself. I'll give you an example. Let's look at an example of a quarter. What happened in La Medina with Doctor and his festival, how you will redesign, decorate, with the graffiti throughout this area, this urban area, that reflects not only the aspirations, but also the spirituality, that reflects also people who've been in transit, and that's quite important. How can you so that's one expression of a city or that is creative, or a city that has embraced its creativity. Which other example can I give of a creative city? it's much easier to find examples of cities that haven't been creative, and I think it's a quite tricky term, because creative cities has been so much embraced by policymakers in the kind of race that everyone wants not to be creative. No one will be, please let me be the loser in the creativity game. No one wants to be there, but it's becoming very much normative, and it's been expected. Okay, for a city to be creative, or a creative city needs to have so many museums, needs to have becoming very prescriptive. It needs to be open to tolerance, and it needs to be. I think it's before anything being true to yourself, and this means, and that's the tricky part. It's a city who would have taken seriously the work of developing, feeding, and nourishing an informed spatial literacy, and literacy, the alphabet. But what is the space
According
of your city?
To
It's always according to whom, but it's important to kind of nourish this creative cities before anything being true to itself. It's about, especially in a context where this concept has been appropriated by policymakers as something that has become kind of a normative trap where everyone wants to look like. And so it's about taking seriously the work of exploring yourself as a city, and developing a form of spatial literacy of your city. What is it about? How well do you know the city? And then once you know what it is about, you can reflect it. You can really support it and emancipate it in a way.
And I think you've rejoiced us when you tried to have this cultural sensitivity to what the city looks like. You developed the concept of cultural Taxawaalu in a 2016 paper titled Rogue Flânerie, in which one of your examples, in which you share and discuss your experiences wandering in Dakar and Cape Town. So, for example, you talk about Parcelles Assainies and saying that there are high civil servants that live nearby the working class and unemployed people. So, what other observations, insights have you gathered from that sensorial experience?
So actually, so first it was Rogue Flânerie. They had a typo and they left the typo. Okay. No, it's not you. They made a typo in the book. I'm very upset about this. No, I'm fine. I'm sucking it up now. Cultural Taxawaalu. So I'm very grateful to one of the hip hop artists that was part of Aura, Muna, who used to take me into some of the Taxawaalu. So for me, it was really about how far a city allows the expression of its diversity in a way. It was the burgeoning of reflection about the openness of a city, how far a city is open, and Taxawaalu is this capacity for wandering about, but it's also, so again, this capacity for a multiplicity of individualities and collectives to be part of the city, of the polis, and to become citizens with rights and with duties. And it's true that and this piece was very much fed by 3 years of sometimes quite frustrating experience in South African context of Cape Town. Why so? Because I realized that Dakar compared to Cape Town, and I will use this parallel, which is an unfair parallel. As I said, it was very much me, taking out off my shoulders all those pressuring concerns I had during my years being a citizen of Cape Town. So it's essentially noticing that a city like Dakar has much more in common with a city like London, where from one street to the next, not even one street to the next, sometimes it's from one sidewalk to the next sidewalk, you have this fancy Victorian houses facing the estates and not that funky buildings. And what comes with this specific architecture is also a specific type of residents that are, if they're not taking meals together, they are at least in contact with each other. They at least, and I'm not saying contact in terms of shaking hands, etc., but at least you see the other. At least you're exposed to the other, and that's for me a way of feeding into a certain form of spatial literacy. Something that in a French context, for instance, if I look at a city like Paris, similar to Cape Town, which is even greater extremes of such divided architecture, where you have Paris with intramuros and the periphery and les banlieues. And similarly in Cape Town you have the CBD, or you have some residential areas that are looking like gated communities, wealthy gated communities, and you have the townships. And apart from specific spots in the city, in the CBD, where, for instance, the train station, the Golden Archer, so different places where you may be able to have this diversity, this multiplicity of the diversity of residents, citizens, meeting, seeing. It's just about a sensorial experience. If you see, then apart from these rare occasions, there is very little a possibility of meeting difference. And when you meet difference, whether it's in a positive or a negative way, and that's why here I'm using the concept of difference and not diversity, you create a relation. Difference is always relational. It's not the supermarket where you have lentils and onions and all this. There's a relationship between it. I'm different from you. And that's where you can start to create link, and that's why you can start to compose with the heterogeneity of what constitutes a city. So that's especially this notion that I had in terms of special mixity that you have, for instance, in Parcelles Asseni, that is quite illustrative. But also, if you look at Medina, that touches, Point E and Fan. So these things are not so much present elsewhere, and for me it's. But again, I'm speaking from my own spatial literacy, or what a city can be about, which can always be biased, obviously.
Because we are all situated somehow.
Exactly.
And talking about situatedness, you discussed the concept of music borderlands and their cultural approach to the regional integration in Africa. So what inspired you or led you to this, to elaborate this concept? Was it to suggest that there are ways, or where economic and political integration seems to fail, artists seem to take it and go beyond borders to create and remain creatives?
So musical borderlands, again, one of the freestyle. I told you, I don't do hip hop, but I'm very much hip hop, and this is one of the kind of freestyle, just like cultural Taxawaalu, Rogue Flânerie, musical borderlands. But for me, it was quite important because being in academia in Europe, and working on African context, you end up meeting this crowd of Africanists. And in this crowd, you have a lot of people who've been part of what is called the borderlands or border studies. And usually the kind of approach or the kind of research that is being done is around smuggling. It's really about the borders in its material trafficking, but it's first about a very much material dimension of the border. That's one. And second, usually it's about a quite negative picture of the other and of regional relationships. So, and I was witnessing something else. For me, regional integration was something that made sense, was historically happening. You know, if you look at trajectories of Makossa, of Rumba, so there are some soundscapes that are regional. You know, living Kinshasa, Brazza, Ivory Coast, Abidjan, Ouaga. So these are existing. Historically, they've been there, and we've been forming a kind of ensemble. So that's for one. And second, it was the example of the here and now of hip hop emergences throughout the West African region, and the informal network of hip hop festivals that were being created. We had for a positive prospect of regional integration, one that was showing a picture that was not only more telling that our CFA, but more, in a way, more indigenous, more of our own. And I think at the end of the day, that's something that's quite important, not only having indigenous and materialities, but also and symbolism, but materialities as well. So not only indigenous practices, not only indigenous aesthetics, but also practices, let's say. And this concept of musical borderlands, for me, was a way to draw on the Chicano literature that has been very very rich in terms of articulating this epistemology of multiplicity. Remember, if for me there's something that is quite key is about how can we create an ensemble with the multiple. How can we think of one in the multiple? How can we? That refers to many concepts of complexity and unitas, multiplexes, Morin could have already developed. So it was for me a way of reconciling this Chicano literature border with the more materialistic and often pessimistic dimension of African dimension, of at least the way African borders were dealt in the literature of border studies, scholarship. So it was a way not only to provide, to shed light on other practice. So it's not about saying it's just fail, it's just saying that there are other things that are being done, and often it's not they are fail, it's sometimes they like official political and economic practices that have never been engaged really seriously, like. And here are citizens, ordinary citizens, who are making things happen at the level, and from which we can learn, maybe. That, for instance, maybe thinking of cultural markets, music markets in national terms won't be helpful, because at the end of the day, we won't be sustainable. Our musical product won't be sustainable on a national market. So we need to think beyond. We need to organize ourselves beyond. So in terms of, for instance, piracy and copyrights, and this management is made on a national basis. How does that make sense? No? So it was a way of revisiting concretely this relationship between those who govern and those who are governed, supposedly, because I believe there's a lot of teaching back that citizens can do, and the example of Africulturban can be quite telling on that, with its collaboration with the Salam Alaikum Festival in Mauritania, etc. But also a way of reminding that when we talk about borderlands, it's important in African context, and especially in its potential for regional integration. It's important to keep in mind both the material and symbolic dimension of it, that one and the other, the both are intermingled, and they need to be thought of as iterative process that feeds into each other.
And talking about iterative processes, and to conclude, you are not only in the research side of the policy and of the cultural questions, you are also interested in policy and taking part into policy making. So, in conclusion, and based on your various experiences, which way forward for cultural and creative industries in Africa?
So, which way forward for cultural and creative industries in Africa? I would say one way would be to talk less about cultural industries and more about cultural economy, and having a broader picture, having the big picture in mind. What can that mean really for us? That's one thing. Another thing is I think it's important to remember that for me a lot of thing will be about translation, and it will be about translating. So what I'm doing as a scholar is I'm translating research knowledge into teaching knowledge to my students. I'm translating operational knowledge from cultural operators on the daily day-to-day and cultural and creative entrepreneurs on how they experience it, their daily lives and routines, to preoccupations, or at least into the language, or more technocratic language of policymakers. And this is about creating dialogue, it's about creating relation, it's about embracing difference. There's a way forward is let's be open, let's talk, let's exchange, let's be in search of ourselves, let's be proud of ourselves, and let's keep on digging and being busy. Let's be busy, and at each and every level, no matter which scale, we can do something. And so it's important also of remembering that this issue of duty and rights, both rights and duties. But yeah, being busy, getting involved, and keep on doing.
And thank you for reminding us of the necessary interaction between right holders and duty bearers. But at the same time, I think your conclusion is very important in the current context of where we are, Brexit. So keeping the dialogue open and getting busy. So thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you.
It was a very fruitful conversation, and I learned a lot. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Hannah. It was a great pleasure.